Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's daily devotional. So, obviously, we have an election here in the United States that has yet to be decided, both for the White House as well as several seats on the Senate and in the House. And it seems to be one of those situations where really the United States hasn't had a situation like this really since 2000, where obviously Florida and the Hanging Chad situation, there were about several weeks there where nobody really knew who had won the presidential race, and we're seeing a lot of reactions in our society right now. We're having riots and protesters in New York and Portland and different places. I'm not really sure why, because nobody's been declared a winner. Certainly, even when there is one, throwing a tantrum because your candidate didn't win is not an acceptable response. But regardless, you've got people who are protesting and getting upset and getting angry because nobody's been declared the winner and so forth. And obviously, as Christians, we talked in the last daily devotional on Tuesday about the need for us to be prepared to submit to whatever authorities are in power. Whoever wins the presidential election, whoever wins the Senate and the House, they are going to be the ones in authority. They will be the rulers of our country, as well as from the national level, as well as to the immediate state, city, county type level as well. But one thing that I've noticed, I guess you could say in a lot of ways, even especially as both Biden and Trump and many others have come out to say, be patient. Okay, well, there's not a lot of patience, and whether that speaks to we're used to our, especially in our modern technologically, in the moment, in the second updates and so forth, we want a result, and we want a result now. We want to know what the situation is. Everybody does. But there's a lot of, I wonder if it speaks to a deeper seated issue about a lack of patience overall. That the ability to restrain one's reaction, both internally and externally, both within and without, if it speaks to a lack of ability to restrain oneself and to be able to put at ease things that are happening that maybe we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe we don't maybe even like what's happening, but can we control ourselves? And there is a certain element of patience that speaks to self-control. And certainly patience also kind of implies trust in God as well. But I want to look at a couple of scriptures this evening. And again, this is not going to be a long daily devotional tonight. I know some people are glued to their TVs or radios or whatever, just listening to news and so forth. But I do want to focus on a couple of scriptures. Here in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 was one of the first scriptures that I thought about when looking at kind of some of the stuff that's going on and the lack of patience and the immediate reaction to things. Certainly, Solomon talks about the importance of recognizing that we all die. It's, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. And then it says in verse 8, the end of a thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. And certainly in verse 9, Solomon kind of goes on to say, do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Why? Because that, in a lot of ways, our primal emotions, especially anger and frustration, they suppress the higher functions of our brain in terms of self-restraint and self-control. And so if we yield ourselves to anger, this is part of the reason why Paul tells the Ephesians, be angry, but do not sin, or sin not. There are going to be times where we're going to feel frustrated, we're going to feel anger, but if we let that go unchecked, it's going to supersede our ability to restrain ourselves and to be calm and to think clearly through a situation. And instead, we're just going to react. And especially if we're angry, we're going to react violently. If we're impatient, we're going to react in a frustrated way. And so in a lot of ways, when Solomon says the end of a thing is better than its beginning, but what does that require? The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Certainly the importance of recognizing, listen, some things are going to take time to work through. And it certainly seems as though, the election is one, but this isn't just about the election. This is speaking about overall, just the sense in which there seems to be less willingness to wait and to be okay with waiting. As a preacher, and I've always been relatively patient, but especially when I became a preacher, I had to learn to be okay with just sitting sometimes. Whether you're at the hospital with somebody, and I know there was one time when I was in San Antonio, I had to take a brother to the hospital, and we were there from, I think it was maybe 9:30 at night until like 4:30 in the morning, and just sat there. Sat there with this brother. We talked a little bit, prayed, and so forth. But for the most part, it was just sitting. And it at least from that perspective, it teaches you that it's okay to just sit and do nothing. I didn't have, at that point, I didn't have a cell phone that was capable of doing anything really, or playing games or looking at anything on the news or anything like that. And so it was really just sitting there. And one of the things that I'm trying to teach my kids is that sometimes you don't need a tablet all the time. You don't need a cell phone all the time. You don't need to be entertained or have something happening all the time to be content. If it means just sitting there with yourself, with your thoughts, maybe in prayer to God, that should be enough. And unfortunately, that lack of patience seems to be permeating our society. And certainly, verse 11, Solomon says, wisdom is good with an inheritance and profitable to those who see the sun. Obviously, wisdom plays a part in patience and certainly in trusting God as well. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and in verse 12 and 13, Paul seems to be referencing, it would seem to be a reference to the elders in Thessalonica. He says, we urge you, brethren, to recognize those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you. Presumably, that would be the elders. Those are the ones who would be, quote, over them. And to esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake. Be at peace among yourselves. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly. Comfort the faint-hearted. Uphold the weak. Be patient with all. See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good, both for yourselves and for all. Now, obviously, in context, certainly a lot of this applies to brethren, and certainly I hope that we're patient with our brethren and that we don't seek to do evil to our brethren. But this certainly applies to people outside of the church as well, to be patient with everyone. Okay, to not, when somebody does something evil or mean to us, not to repay in kind, but to pursue what is good, okay, and to pursue what is right and what is holy. And so this speaks obviously to the restraint that we were talking about, that self-control, the ability to think clearly even through situations that may rile us up and get us upset or irritated or things like that. And then obviously, and of course, throughout the New Testament, and really in a lot of ways throughout the Old Testament, patience is obviously a component that God wants from his people. Obviously, we talked before about the servant of the Lord in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and in verse 24. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, and patient being a key component of that as well. Obviously, patience is a key component for elderships, as Paul instructs that to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 3, as well as Titus in Titus chapter 1, and then he even refers to the older men in chapter 2, and in verse 2 needing to be patient as well. Obviously, in a lot of contexts, the idea of patience goes hand in hand with persecution. And obviously we can see the perseverance, and a lot of times perseverance tends to be the term used more so than patience, because perseverance speaks to the inner character. The perseverance speaks to the determination that no matter what man may do to me, I'm going to be faithful to the Lord. Patience is then kind of the outward manifestation of that. It is that observable self-restraint, even when we are under great emotional pressure, perhaps internally. We are still thinking through things and willing to do what we need to do to be right before God. But in James chapter 1, and this is the last passage we're going to look at this evening, notice James says this is not just a context of persecution, and we've made this application before. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Whether that includes persecution, certainly that's one application, but trials is a very broad term. That includes issues of life that may come. That includes things that people may do that may irritate us or upset us. This includes situations in society where we might be worried or concerned about what we're seeing around us. And James goes on to say, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Well, how so? Well, as we face scenarios that threaten our determination to get to heaven, or threaten our commitment and devotion to serving God, and maybe even threaten our absolute certainty that God is there, that God is in control, that He is watching, and that He's seeing everything that's happening, that He knows what we're going through. Even in those moments, the testing of our faith as we go through that issue and we rely on God to get us through it, it then produces within us kind of a, for lack of a better phrase, a thicker skin, so to speak. When we go through other trials, we can look back on when we went through this or we went through that, and our prayers to God, our reliance on His strength, our commitment to serving Him, our looking at Scripture that assists us in reminding us to be patient and so forth. All of those things helped us to get through that moment or through that trial. And as a result, it trained our mind and our heart to practice self-control. And it trained us to trust in God, that there are things that are beyond our control and that's okay. And I'm wondering if that's what we're seeing a lot of response to right now, is that people are seeing, especially right now, because there is no winner declared right now. And especially, and again, I'm going back to the election. This is not just about the election. Obviously, this is kind of the election just tends to be more of a case in point type of situation where this is pretty much out of everyone's hands at this point. Things have to be counted. There's going to be litigation no matter who wins. It's going to be tied up in courts for weeks, if not months. And as a result, we're going to have to be patient. That's just the bottom line. But what you're seeing is a reaction from people who are frustrated. They're angry. Maybe they are, they believe that their candidate's being cheated, or the other side's being cheated, whatever. And you also have this understanding that they have no control. It feels like it's out of their hands. Well, yeah, it is. It is. Beyond your vote, as it comes to the election, it is out of your hands. But that's okay. And there's so much in our lives that is going to continue to be out of our hands. There's going to be so many things that we're not going to be able to change or fix. And that's okay. And this is where James, he emphasizes the fact that this trains us to be stronger. That the testing of our faith, the testing of our trust in God, the testing of our devotion, whether or not we're going to continue to be faithful to Him, no matter what happens, it produces patience. But notice then what patience then does. Remember what we looked at back in Ecclesiastes, and how that Solomon, in the same text in which he describes the importance of patience and so forth, he also talked about wisdom. Well, let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Well, what is the perfect work of patience? What does patience then produce in us that makes us complete, that gives us an edge or an advantage going forward in situations that we may face that continue to be problematic or obstacles for us? If any of you lacks wisdom, I don't think he's changed gears. He's not switched gears here. He's still in the same thought process, which says that verse 4, what is the perfect work of patience? it produces wisdom. So then the testing of your faith produces patience. Patience, when you fully commit to being patient, what does patience then, and the ability to restrain your reactions, what does that then produce? It produces wisdom. The ability to look at the big picture of things, the ability to step outside of yourself and whatever immediate emotional situation you may be in, and think logically, reasonably, and most importantly, spiritually about any given situation. And the fact is, the importance of us being able to step outside of ourselves, to think circumspectly. This is part of why Paul told the Ephesians in Ephesians chapter 5 to be circumspect, okay, or to walk circumspectly, to be aware of yourself and aware of the situations you're in, so that even when temptation may come or trials or obstacle may come, no matter what the emotional situation may be, whether you're angry, whether you're in midst of temptation, whatever the situation may be, or sad, you have sorrow, you're able to step outside of yourself and view things from a logical and spiritual perspective, and then be able to react accordingly. Again, what did Paul tell the Ephesians? Be angry, but sin not. Well, we can't allow our emotions to get the better of us. And unfortunately, we see in our society, and again, the election is just a case in point situation. We see a society that is somewhat, and it's not devolving or anything like that. This has been true of humanity since Adam and Eve. Ultimately, people tend to react emotionally, and their emotions rule their reactions. They react based on what they're feeling rather than thinking through what they're doing. Countless people are in prison right now because of terrible things that they did in the heat of the moment that they weren't thinking through. They were jealous, they were angry, whatever. And at this point, probably they wish they had stopped and said, I really should have thought about what I was doing before I did it. I tell my kids all the time, you need to think about what you're doing. You may get frustrated, you may get angry, but you have to be able to control yourself and think about what you're doing. And certainly, as a parent, that's I need to practice what I preach, and that makes it even more important for adults and people who at least are supposed to be adults to function in that way, because otherwise we just teach our children react however feels right. If you're angry, just go screaming at people or run them over into the road or something, and that's okay because it's what feels right, when in fact that's not what God says. All right, that's the daily devotional for you tonight. I hope that's something beneficial. Again, this is not just about the election. This is just kind of a case in point. We're seeing a lot of the reactions from people throwing tantrums and so forth. And tantrums in some cases is something of an understatement, because some of them are riots. And it's not even necessarily because they're upset that somebody won and their candidate didn't. No one's even been declared yet, and they're rioting. And so it just goes to show that as Christians, we have to be able to teach our kids and remind ourselves that patience is a virtue. That's true. But patience is trained. This is not something you just flip a switch and all of a sudden you have patience. Patience is trained through successful interactions as you go through life. Okay, you may feel something, you may feel like yelling, you may feel like screaming, whatever, but you have to control yourself. You have to restrain yourself and think through the situation. All right, everybody. Tomorrow we'll have our daily devotional at 6:30 p.m., Lord willing. Until then, everybody have a safe night, and y'all take care. Thanks, everybody.